I can tell you that my beautiful wife, Isabel, would be the first to say that her life truly started when she began living her vocation as a wife and as a mother.
Just like the nuns, the sisters, all the single ladies of contemporary times, even way back in pre-colonial times, women can thrive and follow their highest calling and serve their people without being a wife and or mother. We see remnants of this goddess worship culture in how the Catholic Church permits the prayer to of female saints, and like I said, it explains why Harrison Butker in his speech expresses his love and appreciation for his wife. With that being said, he is still upholding the male Catholic prerogative to control women's behavior, and this is a recurring theme in how the Catholic Church in its teachings prop women up as the intellectually and morally weaker sex, as exemplified by the stories of Eve and Jezebel. And because men feel entitled to telling women what to do because of our perceived moral and intellectual weakness as portrayed in the Bible, they say things like, women's lives start at marriage and motherhood. And the statement has been proven wrong by stories like Princess Urduha and the generations of nuns devoting their life to others and God. If you've ever been in Catholic Mass with the architecture, the music, the rituals, it's euphoric. You really feel like you're in communion with God because God is beautiful, and to be surrounded with so much beauty, it's nothing short of heavenly. Hey bestie! Welcome to the Spoiled Girly Support Group podcast, where we talk about how to get that bag while also securing your own bag. I'm your host, Elle, and let's get into it. On today's episode, we are doing a deep dive on Catholicism, goddess worship, Jezebel, and how that NFL kicker was so wrong for that commencement speech. And all of these topics may seem random, but they're all connected in the end, so I need you to stay tuned because the connections are really satisfying and the revelations are revelationing. We have a lot to cover, but before we get into it, I need you to hit the like, subscribe, and the notification bell so you never miss a Spoiled Girly episode. With that being said, let's get into it. American football kicker for the Kansas City Chiefs, Harrison Butker Jr., went under social media fire last week for delivering this commencement speech.
I want to speak directly to you briefly because I think it is you, the women, who have had the most diabolical lies told to you. How many of you are sitting here now about to cross this stage and are thinking about all the promotions and titles you are going to get in your career? Some of you may go on to lead successful careers in the world, but I would venture to guess that the majority of you are most excited about your marriage and the children you will bring into this world. I can tell you that my beautiful wife, Isabel, would be the first to say that her life truly started when she began living her vocation as a wife and as a mother. I'm on this stage today and able to be the man I am because I have a wife who leans into her vocation. I'm beyond blessed with the many talents God has given me, but it cannot be overstated that all of my success is made possible because a girl I met in band class back in middle school would convert to the faith, become my wife, and embrace one of the most important titles of all, homemaker.
I mean, that's an unconventional commencement speech, but I've seen worse. Let me get into my rant, okay? I have beef with people who use college commencement as like a platform for their activism of whatever or some sort. Like, you're supposed to be there to motivate the next generation of the workforce, encourage them to live up to their fullest potential, all that. Like I said, this is not the worst commencement speech I've ever seen. Can we all agree that commencement speeches should be about the people you are delivering this to and not for your own topics that you want to preach to other people? Okay, and we're not going to get into it in this class because this class is already long enough. In his 20-minute address, Butker denounced termination rights, Pride Month, the panini, the tyranny of diversity, equity, and inclusion at the Catholic Liberal Arts College in Atchison, Kansas. And in this class, we're going to cover the backlash on what he said about women's lives starting at marriage and motherhood, and for women to embrace their highest vocation, which is marriage and motherhood. So that's the scope of today's class. We're not going to get into all the other stuff he said. With all that being said, let's hear what people have to say about it.
Speech at a college graduation ceremony and talked about how a woman's true place is in the Okay, so you'd rather go to a grueling 9 to 5, knowing that your salary is just going to pay for your kids' childcare anyway. Meanwhile, some strangers raising your kids, you have no idea what they're learning when you could be with them, the mother of your children, teaching them practical skills at one of the most crucial periods of their lives where their brains are developing. Look, the actual underlying issue here is that society is dramatically changing and it's becoming even harder to get that stable family unit. I mean, infidelity is at an all time high. You have these extremely feminine men, masculine women. Women are even coming out and saying they were ripped off by this idea of feminism. And unfortunately, society, unless something's done, is going in the wrong direction. And that's why I think so many people are turned off by this concept, because it's so unattainable nowadays with what's happening.
I mean, when you look at it that way, this speech doesn't really sound that bad, taken out of context, like just that piece about him celebrating his wife and how he appreciates her so much. And we're gonna get into this. Let's get into this right now. Let's talk about benevolent sexism. And in this context, sexism is basically just how you treat the other sex differently. Basically, if you treat someone differently, that's an ism. So benevolent sexism is a positive form of sexism in which men treat women better than they do other men. They are more chivalrous, they're more generous, they really appreciate and pour into the women around them, especially their female partner. That's benevolent sexism. Is it benevolent sexism or is it chivalry? Anyway, the opposite of that is hostile sexism, which we see a lot of online, where men literally despise women, they hate on women, they are hurtful physically and emotionally and mentally to women. That's hostile sexism. And here's my hot take is if a man doesn't treat a woman differently, he just treats her like another man, I would say that is also sexism. So I take benevolent sexism all day, every day, because that's how I should be treated, period. So I actually sent out a newsletter about this, about my beef with academia. So if you're not subscribed to the newsletter, what are you doing? Subscribe. I spill the manifest tea on there almost every week. I don't have a schedule. A lot of people are oh, you should be more consistent and do this and that. I'm no, I'm in my flow. I'm in my creative flow era. There's no schedule, okay? But when I do send out newsletters, it's a vibe. Anyway, I sent out this newsletter about my beef with academia, about why would you label something positive sexism? Because honestly, when a man doesn't treat a woman differently, he treats her like a man, that in itself is sexism, because he is not accounting for the inherent risk and labor that he brings into a woman's life. I would say that's sexism. It's giving equality. No, relationships between men and women will never be equal labor-wise, so the vibe is equity, not equality. Annoying. Anyway, if you're not familiar with the Catholic faith, this may rub you the wrong way, but let's get into this because there's different types of Catholics. There's the Orthodox and the Romans and all the other types. And then within those different types, it's also geographical. So I want to let you know where my perspective is coming from. I am from the island Roman Catholic kind of denomination. It's not even a denomination. The area. Okay, that's the vibe. Island Roman Catholic vibe. So Filipinos are Roman Catholics for the most part, and we're from the islands. And that is a very important distinction because the islands, the Polynesian islands, the Micronesian islands, they engaged in pagan female goddess worship culture, and the colonizers bringing their church with them. They called these religions cults or fertility cults, kind of to downplay what these religions were about, but it's a religion, okay? So it's a goddess worship culture, and it's always been labeled as a fertility culture because what could women possibly offer other than her womb? Annoying. Anyway, I've been doing a lot of soul searching and studying and researching, and it's because I'm confused. Honestly, I'm so confused because whenever these religious people post up in their pulpits, they're talking about
the woman's place is here, blah, blah, blah.
And there's certain parts where I'm kind of this speech, there's a certain part where I'm okay, that's not bad. He's honoring his wife. He recognizes the sacrifice. And then they turn around and they say, oh,
her life began when she became a wife and mother.
What was she doing before? What was she doing before? Her life began when she had an official relationship to me. No. So I'm so confused. Why is Western like Catholicism like that? I wasn't raised like that. And I'm like, it's because it's a different form, it's a different brand of Catholicism. So this whole class is basically me reconciling with myself. Why is my brand of Catholicism different from this Western Catholic revival, like Greek statue, like masculine revival type of vibe? Like, why? Finding out more about my pre-colonial goddess worship culture, it explains everything. It explains everything. Like, it explains why, like, my culture is so open towards a lot of people and different identities. It explains why we're so happy. It explains why we love women so much and why I felt so celebrated despite having the traditional Catholic constraints on behavior. Okay? It explains why, and I wanted to share my findings with you. And before we get into my findings, I feel like I want to connect everything at first. Let's get into Harrison Butker's speech about how his wife's life started when she became a wife and mother. Basically, her life started when she had an official legal religious affiliation with a man. And obviously, a lot of women were so upset by that statement, and rightly so. Like, what do you mean a woman's life begins when she marries a man? Like, what? So does that mean like women aren't living life before marriage? Like, give me a break. And it's so funny though, because he gave that speech at a Catholic university run by nuns. Unmarried, educated women who gave their life in service to God and others around them. Like, so you mean their life hasn't started yet? What? So this statement of his was so offensive that the nuns sponsoring that Catholic college clapped back. Like, you know it's real when the nuns get involved because they're like the queen, you know? Like, they don't comment on everything. They're like, silence, you know?
They don't deserve my energy.
Like, they're not gonna comment. They really said, like, letting go and letting God. But the sisters felt called to write an official statement clapping back on Facebook. Like, this whole thing is so precious. Like, the nuns are on Facebook. Anyway, they write,
As a founding institution and sponsor of Benedictine College, the Sisters of Mount St. Scholastica find it necessary to respond to the controversial remarks of Harrison Butker as commencement speaker. The Sisters of Mount St. Scholastica do not believe that Harrison Butker's comments in his 2024 Benedictine College commencement address represent the Catholic Benedictine Liberal Arts College that our founders envisioned and in which we have been so invested. Instead of promoting unity in our church and our nation and the world, his comments seem to have fostered division. One of our concerns was the assertion that being a homemaker is the highest calling for a woman. We sisters have dedicated our lives to God and God's people, including the many women whom we have taught and influenced during the past 160 years. The women have made a tremendous difference in the world in their roles as wives and mothers and through their God-given gifts in leadership, scholarship, and their careers. Our community has taught young women and men not just how to be homemakers in a limited sense, but rather how to make a gospel-centered, compassionate home within themselves where they can welcome others as Christ, empowering them to be the best versions of themselves. We reject a narrow definition of what it means to be Catholic. We are faithful members of the Catholic Church who embrace and promote the values of the Gospel, Saint Benedict, and Vatican II, and the teachings of Pope Francis.
I mean, watching nuns clap back to a football player on Facebook was not on my bingo card for 2024, but here we are. And honestly, they ate with that. Like, I bet you they were all heated under their habits, like watching this speech. And I don't know if you're watching Call the Midwife, and if you're not, what are you doing? Get on it. It's an amazing show. Anyway, I just imagine Sister Evangelina watching this, getting heated, and then typing up a Facebook post response. She's like,
Who the hell do you think you are, telling women their highest calling is being a homemaker when you're giving a speech in an institution run by unmarried, educated women who devoted their life in service to God?
and then one of the other nuns edited it for her before they posted it because nuns can't publish that kind of stuff. Like, the nerve. Anyway, this isn't just about the sisters' feelings, okay? It's biblical.
The toxic Christian talking point that it is a woman's vocation to be a wife and mother and a husband's vocation to be a husband and a father is simply not biblical, and it is not Christian. This is what the Bible actually says to the unmarried. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 8. I say to the unmarried and to the widows, it is good for them to remain as I am. But if they do not have self-control, they should marry, since it is better to marry than to burn with desire. The Apostle Paul, you know, the guy who wrote the majority of the New Testament, he believes that being single is a gift. He expands in verse 32. He says, I want you to be without concerns. The unmarried man is concerned about the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But the married man is concerned about the things of the world, how he may please his wife, and his interests are divided. The unmarried woman is concerned about the things of the Lord, so that she may be holy in body and in spirit. But the married woman is concerned about things of the world, how she may please her husband. I am saying this for your own benefit, not to put a restraint on you, but to promote what is proper, and so that you may be devoted to the Lord without distraction. Verse 38, so then, he who marries his fiancée does well, but he who does not marry will do better. Verse 39, a wife is bound as long as her husband is living, but if her husband dies, she is free to be married to anyone she wants, only in the Lord. But she is happier if she remains, as she is, in my opinion, single. Non-Christians, you have a right to be upset about this statement. The way I feel about it is he was speaking as a Catholic to a Catholic university about Catholic values. As a Christian, what I'm upset about from Catholics and Christians alike is the way that Christians speak to single women and men, making them believe that their job on earth, their vocation is to be a wife, a mother, a husband, a father. That is simply just not the truth. Our purpose here on earth is to serve the Lord. And for everybody, that may not look like getting married and having children. Period. And as a college-educated, successful, career-driven woman who I'm open to whatever God has for me. Straight up, if something comes along and it's like, this is your husband, and I feel called in that moment to get married and have kids, great, but I am not looking for it because that is not God's purpose for my life.
Gabby Hanna reading the Bible to me was also not part of my bingo card for 2024, but here we are. And I wanted to touch on her comment about how the single shaming has to stop. And this reminds me of Shakshuka girl. Like, she was just minding her own business on Sabbath, taking her day of rest, making shakshuka, delighting in God's creation. And the conservatives were literally foaming at the mouth, attacking her. Like,
How dare she love her single life? How dare she become an idle asset? How dare she celebrate her unoccupied womb?
gross. Like, I'm so done with the single shaming. I swear, like, all these people who are mad at single women are just mad that the single women aren't picking them, okay? Like, women really would rather be single than pick a man. And we're gonna get into this in a little bit about how the Bible and the myths and the narratives that we tell ourselves have ingrained in men this entitlement to women, and it's not just hurting us women, it's hurting the men as well. So stay tuned. Anyway, Gabby said something which really got me thinking.
All sides of this suck because as a Catholic, he has every right to go to a Catholic university and talk about Catholic morals and values and traditions. And also Catholic students have a right to hear him speak about Catholic morals and traditions and values at their Catholic college commencement. The fact that anybody's upset about this that isn't Catholic, you have no business or reason to be upset about this. Like, you wouldn't go into a mosque and like be upset that they're talking about their religion there. He's talking about his religion in a place that literally teaches the religion. Like, leave him alone. Like, it's honestly none of your business. It's not. It's none of your business. If you're not Catholic, you're not a part of that community, you don't have any right to talk about what he said in that Catholic setting. They all agreed to be there. They're all paying tuition to be there, right?
I actually agree with this, and the only reason we're doing this class is because I'm Catholic. I went through my sacraments, I went to Catholic school all my life, and honestly, I'm not a good Catholic. I'm barely Catholic. I'm probably a bad Catholic, but I'm Catholic nonetheless. And if you ever heard anyone say that, like they're a bad Catholic, that's such a Catholic thing to say because the vibe of Catholicism is to accept that you're imperfect, that you're just full of sin. Like, there's this sin vibe going on all day, every day, and we're just trying to be a better person each day and every day. So I'm saying that because whenever I see Catholic influencers or people like preach about their Catholicism online, it's like, I don't know. I don't think that's the vibe. Like, we're all sinful humans. And here's how I can tell if someone's Christian or Catholic. If they're talking about their faith online, they're Christian. I don't know why Catholics outside of conservative influencers don't talk about their faith. I don't know why. And like, I'm not even comfortable talking about it. But I wanted to get into the history of Catholicism and doing a deep dive because I feel like it explains a lot of the questions that we have as women in this world, in this day and age. So let's do this deep dive on Catholicism before we go any further. So the rest of this stuff may seem like random topics that I just put together and there's no connection. But as you see in this mind map, well, it's not really a mind map, it's more of like a brainstorm map. All of these ideas connect with each other, and the revelations are revelationing. So wait for me to reveal, okay? Our journey begins with the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is the largest Christian church in the world. It has over 1 billion members and is the world's largest religious group. Its members believe that Jesus Christ started the Catholic Church 2,000 years ago. The church's headquarters are in the Vatican City. Catholics worship Jesus. They also venerate the Virgin Mary more than other Christians, calling her the Mother of God based on Elizabeth's greeting. It is important to note that Catholics do not worship Mary. Instead, they honor her as one honors a queen. This type of honor is called hyperdulia. And I'm mentioning this detail about Catholics having a kind of hyperfixation on Mother Mary. Like, honestly, there's the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and then there's Mother Mary. And I don't know about other denominations, but Roman Catholic women that I know, especially mothers, they usually pray to Mother Mary. If their child is sick, they're worried about their child. And also, it's a Catholic thing to have a favorite saint. Like, there's saints for animals, for sickness, for passing the board exam. Like, there's a saint for that. You gotta pray to him or her. And I honestly wouldn't be surprised if someone comes out as the saint for influencers. Like, I will buy all the merch. And like, honestly, the Catholics, they have the saints and they have merch. Anyway, it is worth mentioning that Catholics have female saints because it gets us into the next topic, goddess worship. And I know it seems fragmented right now, like I said, but it'll all connect in the end, okay? Merlin Stone's book, When God Was a Woman, explores how the shift from the matriarchy to patriarchy came about. Stone tells us the story of the goddess who reigned supreme in the Near and Middle East. Under her reign, societal roles differed markedly from those in patriarchal Judeo-Christian cultures. Women bought and sold property, traded in the marketplace, and inherited title and land from their mothers. Documenting the wholesale rewriting of myth and religious dogmas, Merlin Stone describes an ancient conspiracy in which the goddess was reimagined as a wanton, depraved figure, a characterization confirmed and perpetuated by one of modern culture's best-known legends, that of the fall of Adam and Eve. Insightful and thought-provoking, this is essential reading for anyone interested in the origin and current gender roles and in rediscovering women's power. We're gonna do another reading today because this whole class wouldn't make sense if I don't read these things to you, so settle in. Who was she? The woman god. Ashtoreth, the despised pagan deity of the Old Testament, was, despite the efforts of biblical scribes to disguise her identity by repeatedly using the masculine gender, actually Astarte, the great goddess as she was known in Canaan, the Near Eastern queen of heaven. Those heathen idol worshippers of the Bible had been praying to a woman god, elsewhere known as Inin, Inanna, Nana, Nut, Anat, Anahita, Istar, Isis, Alset, Isara, Asherah, Ashtart, Ataret, Atar, and Hathor, the many-named divine ancestress. Yet each name denoted in the various languages and dialects of those who revered her, the great goddess. Was it merely a coincidence that during all those years of Sunday school, I never learned that Ashtoreth was female? Even more astonishing was the archaeological evidence which proved that her religion had existed and flourished in the Near and Middle East for thousands of years before the arrival of the patriarchal Abraham, first prophet of the male deity Yahweh. Archaeologists had traced the worship of the goddess back to the Neolithic communities about 7000 BC, some to the Upper Paleolithic cultures of about 25,000 BC. From the type of its Neolithic origins, its existence was repeatedly attested to until well into Roman times. Throughout the book, a trend is revealed. Matriarchal female goddess worshipping religions are replaced by patriarchal male god worshipping religions. And here's a question. What effect did the worship of the female deity actually have upon the status of women in the cultures in which she was extolled? The ruling sex, having the power to diffuse its own outlooks, tends to generalize its specific ideology. Should the trends of the subordinate sex run counter, they are likely to be suppressed all the more forcibly in proportion as the dominant sex is more overwhelming. The result is that the hegemony of male deities is usually associated with the dominance of men, and the hegemony of female deities with the dominance of women. And as an example, they mentioned the Pelu clan of Micronesia, where the women were considered to be socially and politically superior to the men. And this preference for goddesses over gods, they wrote, in the clan of the Pelu Islanders has been explained, no doubt rightly, by the high importance of women in the social system of the people. It is also mentioned that in early society, women wielded the main sources of wealth. They were the owners of the house, the producers of food, they provided shelter and security. Economically, therefore, man was dependent upon woman. In Egypt, the archaic system of mother-kin, with its preference for women over men in matters of property and inheritance, lasted down to Roman times. There is further evidence that Egypt was a land where women had great freedom and control of their own lives and perhaps of their husbands as well. And it is also suggested that women's condition was high due perhaps to their economic independence. Many women appear as parties in civil litigations and independent business transactions, even with their own husbands and fathers. In Egypt, all property went in the female line. The woman was the mistress of the house, and in early tales, she is represented as having entire control of herself and the place. So basically, they're suggesting that society informed the dominant religion, not the other way around. But once the dominant religion is established, it then informs society to maintain its domination. So just throwing it out there, can a female worshipping religion then improve the position of women in society? Food for thought. So let's talk about these societies where women were held in high esteem. The book mentions the Pelu Islanders of Palau, an archipelago of over 500 islands, part of the Micronesia region. And as an islander myself, we grew up with myths and histories of female warriors. There's this one story we were taught in history class about a female warrior, and now people debate whether she was real or not, whether her story is legend, myth, or history. But as Stone writes, myths present ideas that guide perception, conditioning us to think and even perceive in a particular way, especially when we are young and impressionable. So imagine that, me, a little girl, baby Elle, listening to the story that I'm gonna tell you, and how this story lives rent-free in my head and informed how I see myself and the world, and how all the other little Filipino girls who were taught this story, how they see themselves and the world. And the story is about Princess Urduha. The story goes, to the Pangasinan court, many a suitor came, seeking for the hand of fair Urduha. The princess said to them, I will marry only the man who can defeat me. My husband must be braver, stronger, and wiser than myself. As no one qualified to her demands, she remained unmarried all her life, for no one wished to be beaten by a woman. When her mother died, she became the ruler of Pangasinan region. Her bravery and skills were known far and near. She ruled her people well and wisely, like the famous Amazons of old. Princess Urduha was not only intelligent, beautiful, and dominant, but also the very personification of kindness and virtue. Now, even though I went to Catholic school and was taught the male-focused aspects of Catholicism and Abrahamic male God-worshipping religion, I was also taught my pre-colonial history, where women led civilizations. And this vibe of using patriarchal Abrahamic male God-worshipping religions as an aid to colonize matriarchal female goddess-worshipping religions is a common theme in history as per Stone's book. And now back to the topic, this story relays the pre-colonial concept of marriage, which is a woman finding a man who is her match or her superior. And if no such man presents himself, she can remain single and be of service to her people. Like, do you see the connections now? Just like the nuns, the sisters, all the single ladies of contemporary times, even way back in pre-colonial times, women can thrive and follow their highest calling and serve their people without being a wife and or mother. And let's get into this. I see God in everyone, and that's why I talk about servant mindset all the time. Like, watch this class if you missed it. And by being a servant to others, you are a servant to God. For when you're kind to your neighbor, you're kind to God's creation, and then you're kind to God. And when you do evil deeds to your neighbor, you do evil deeds to God's creation, and you do evil deeds to God. Like, do you get it now? You don't need to be married or be a mother to honor God. Like, just be good to your neighbor, period. Now, back to this topic of women refusing men who cannot compete with her or beat her in duel and all these intelligence measures. I'll get no nuance Nellies in the comments asking,
Well, doesn't that reinforce how women should be subordinate to men, be submissive to men, so you're saying men should pick women who are inferior to them?
like, You're missing the point, as you usually do. Men are inherently risk and inherently labor, so finding a man who is your match or is better than you in certain aspects allow men to make up for the inherent drain on your life energy as the source of creation and as the conduit to the future. Okay? And honestly, I think Princess Urduha just didn't want to marry a man. Like, valid. I mean, anyway, this story, whether we recognize it or not, has informed the mindset of generations of women who heard this story. Like, it's not even a debate or a conversation. As a woman, you're only supposed to date or marry a man who is your match or offers you an improvement of quality of life. Okay? Women are only supposed to marry across or up, socioeconomically, spiritually, whateverly. Okay, because once again, men are inherently risk and inherently labor. So someone who is your match or above is the only man who can make the cost of these risks and labor worthwhile. Like I'm telling you, the myths, the narratives that we tell ourselves and each other may seem harmless, but they have a way of creeping into our psychology in ways that affect our lives immensely. Anyway, back to the topic of finding out that God was actually a woman, and the shift from female goddess worship to male god worship was a tool used in colonization. And speaking of that, let's talk about Jezebel. In the New English Bible, we read that Elijah confronts the ancient religion as that of Asherah. It tells us in 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 19, that these 400 people were 400 prophets of the goddess Asherah, who are Jezebel's pensioners. It is most evident in the story of Jezebel, who has long been presented as the epitome and symbol of the treacherously evil woman, that her real crime was her refusal to accept the worship of Yahweh, choosing instead the religion of her own parents, that of the Queen of Heaven and her Baal. Her parents, as queen and king of Sidon, some say Tyre, held high positions in the ancient religion as high priestess and priest. Not only did Jezebel herself follow the ancient religion, but according to the Bible, as a result of her influence, her husband Ahab, a Hebrew king of Israel, adopted the pagan ways as well, erecting Asherim in the temple. Jezebel's supposed crime, that of starting a rumor that resulted in the death of a man, becomes questionable when we realize that it was her husband who actually desired the dead man's property, and it was with letters signed with Ahab's name that she was accused. There's a lot going on there. Jezebel was murdered in the most gruesome manner described in morbid detail in the Bible, surely intended as a warning to all other treacherous women. The execution was carried out by the avenging Hebrew hero, Jehu. But Jehu's motives become frighteningly clear when, after the death of the pagan queen, he arranged a massacre of those who ate at her royal table, and then later claimed the throne of Israel as his own. ... So it was recorded in the book of 2 Kings that Jehu and his men murdered every member of the congregation and then finally made a latrine of the building itself. And when the massacre and desecration was completed, Jehu is recorded to have heard Yahweh say, "Thou hast done well, that which is right in mine eyes." And so went the eradication of female goddess worship. The story of Jezebel serves as a warning for women who dare to reject the male god worship of Abrahamic religion. Like the way they write about and paint about her demise, like they really made it so extra. And it's to scare us women, so we don't defy them like Jezebel did. And Jezebel's story is alive and well today, almost as a way of saying,
See? This is what will happen to you if you don't follow the rules. You're gonna end up just like her.
so much so that Jezebel has become a slur towards women, a synonym for whore, and all kinds of names meant to control women's behavior. Through the centuries, the name Jezebel came to be associated with false prophets. By the early 20th century, it was also associated with fallen or abandoned women. In Christian lore, a comparison to Jezebel suggested that a person was a pagan or an apostate masquerading as a servant of God. By manipulation and seduction, she misled the saints of God into sins of idolatry and schmexual immorality. In particular, Christians associated Jezebel with promiscuity. The cosmetics which Jezebel applied before her death also led some Christians to associate makeup with vice. In the Middle Ages, the chronicler Matthew Paris criticized Isabella of Angoulême, the queen consort of John, King of England, by writing that she was more Jezebel than Isabel. In modern usage, the name of Jezebel is sometimes used as a synonym for sexually promiscuous or controlling women. And the church wasn't just controlling women. It also is controlling men. In Joseph Heinrich's The Weirdest People in the World, How Westerners Became Psychologically Peculiar and Peculiarly Prosperous, he writes, monogamous norms suppress testosterone at a societal level. By prohibiting higher status men from monopolizing potential wives, monogamous norms allow many more lower status men to both get married, pair bond, and father children. And by weird, he means Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. The consequence is that weird marriage, which of course was built out of Christian marriage, generates a peculiar endocrinology. It's widely believed by physicians that testosterone naturally declines as men age. In the 21st century United States, these drops are so severe that some middle-aged men are treated medically for low T. But as I've explained, across societies possessing more human-typical marriage institutions, we don't see these declines as often, and when we do, they aren't nearly as steep as in weird societies. It seems that a weird endocrinology accompanies our weird psychology. I've spent some time on testosterone to delineate just one biological pathway that institutions have evolved to exploit as a mechanism to influence our behavior, motivations, and decision making. Here you're seeing how the church, through the institution of monogamous marriage, reached down and grabbed men by the testicles. I mean, okay, that is wild. He goes on to write, based on work in weird societies, men with higher testosterone levels are more likely to be arrested, deal in stolen property, fall into debt, and use weapons in a fight. They are also more likely to smoke, abuse substances, drink heavily, gamble, and engage in dangerous activities. Testosterone is associated with measures of dominance in both teenagers and adults, and there's a weak but persistent relationship between testosterone levels and violent aggression, including domestic violence. Basically, the vibe is monogamy, and all these Catholic constraints on men's schmexuality were created to lower men's testosterone so that they would become more peaceful, less likely to commit crime, less likely to be violent against each other, and violent against women. By mandating monogamy, access to women was expanded to more men, that even the lowest status of men have a chance at having a wife. And so men and their violent urges are pacified by women's bodies and labor. It's giving, they handed us out like binkies to these men. Like, they're like, Oprah, you get a binky, you get a binky, everybody gets a binky. Anyway, it was so successful though because men's violence and risk-taking went down and men actually stayed and parented and raised their children, which means increased parental investment and increased survival and overall better outcomes for their children. And that's why weird societies, aka Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic societies, are peculiarly prosperous. It's because they invest in their children. So it's not all bad. I mean, it's a choice. Now, tying it all in, I made us a mind map connecting all the dots. We start with Harrison Butker's commencement speech, and it got us into talking about the Catholic Church, the fixation on the Virgin Mary, female saints, then goddess worship, and then it got us into the book When God Was a Woman, and how societies that engaged in female goddess worship culture held women in high esteem and in high position in society. And this is why I wanted to talk about all these topics, because here's the revelation, okay? The high esteem and position of women in Catholic society, as evidenced by Harrison Butker showing love and appreciation for his wife in her sacrifice to stay home and be a mother and wife to him and his family, this high esteem and position of women in Catholic society is a relic of female goddess worshiping cultures. We see remnants of this goddess worship culture in how the Catholic Church permits the prayer to of female saints. And like I said, it explains why Harrison Butker in his speech expresses his love and appreciation for his wife. With that being said, he is still upholding the male Catholic prerogative to control women's behavior. And this is a recurring theme in how the Catholic Church, in its teachings, prop women up as the intellectually and morally weaker sex, as exemplified by the stories of Eve and Jezebel. And because men feel entitled to telling women what to do because of our perceived moral and intellectual weakness as portrayed in the Bible, they say things like, women's lives start at marriage and motherhood. And the statement has been proven wrong by stories like Princess Urduha and the generations of nuns devoting their life to others and God. All this to say, now we know God was a woman. And honestly, we don't have to create a religion out of it. Like, we women know it to be true, and that's enough. And even the author of the book, God Was a Woman, Merlin Stone, she recognizes this. I am not suggesting a return or revival of the ancient female religion. As Sheila Collins writes, as women, our hope for fulfillment lies in the present and future, and not in some mythical golden past. I do hold the hope, however, that a contemporary consciousness of the once widespread veneration of the female deity as the wise creatress of the universe and all life and civilization may be used to cut through the many oppressive and falsely founded patriarchal images, stereotypes, customs, and laws that were developed as direct reactions to goddess worship by the leaders of the later male-worshipping religions. For, as I shall explain, it was the ideological inventions of the advocates of the later male deities imposed upon that ancient worship with the intention of destroying it and its customs that are still, through their subsequent absorption into education, law, literature, economics, philosophy, psychology, media, and general social attitudes imposed upon even the most non-religious people of today. And that's what we're doing here today, okay? We are bringing consciousness to how God was a woman and how a lot of the messages that we are fed nowadays as women, this is why, okay? And like I said, we don't need to create a religion out of it. The vibe is not to tear down Catholicism. I pray that we can rediscover, share with each other, create myths, lore, narratives that posit our high inherent worth and value as women. We already know the truth and we are waking up. We don't need to wait for another religious upheaval. We can change the stories, the myths, the lore we tell each other now. And we can change how we perceive ourselves in the world. And that's why I end every class by telling you that you have so much inherent worth and value in a world that is hell-bent on devaluing you. Okay, is everything clicking now? That we live in a world heavily informed by these Abrahamic religions, and we don't need a loud revolution where we shout at men to let us do what we want, think what we want, say what we want. We'll just do it. This whole vibe of protesting, proselytizing to a male audience still reinforces this sentiment that we need their approval, that we need their permission. Like, no, we'll just do our own thing and they can deal with it. We can cultivate our relationship with God ourselves. And for a lot of us, Catholicism gets us closer to God. One of the biggest appeals of Catholicism is the beauty, the aesthetic. And it's no wonder that out of all the religions today, Catholicism is having a revival. Because in our age of aesthetification, Catholicism, with its pervasive and cohesive and enduring aesthetic, is winning the religious marketplace. Even Lana Del Rey, the coquette queen, has been on the Catholic coquette vibe. And it's true that beauty gets us closer to God. If you've ever been in Catholic Mass with the architecture, the music, the rituals, it's euphoric. You really feel like you're in communion with God because God is beautiful, and to be surrounded with so much beauty, it's nothing short of heavenly. With all that being said, God was a woman, and today God is a man. God endures, and so will you. Bestie, wake up.